The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, Chapter 8, What Happened After Dinner.
"And now," said Lucy, "do please tell us what's happened to Mr. Tumnus." "Ah, that's bad," said Mr. Beaver, shaking his head. "That's very, very bad business. There's no doubt he was taken off by the police. I got that from a bird who saw it done." "But where's he been taken to?" asked Lucy. "Well, they were heading northwards when they were last seen, and we all know what that means."
"No, we don't," said Susan. Mr. Beaver shook his head in a very gloomy fashion.
"I'm afraid it means they were taking him to her house." "But what will they do to him there, Mr. Beaver?"
gasped Lucy.
"Well," said Mr. Beaver, "you can't exactly say for sure, but there's not many taken in there that ever comes out again. Statues, all full of statues, they say it is, in the courtyard and up the stairs and in the hall. People she's turned."
He paused and shuddered.
"She's turned into stone."
"But Mr. Beaver," said Lucy, can't we? I mean, we must do something to save him. It's too dreadful, and it's all on my account."
I don't doubt you'd save him if you could, dearie," said Mrs. Beaver, "but you've no chance of getting into that house again. She will never have you come out alive."
Couldn't we come up with some strategy?" said Peter. "I mean, couldn't we dress up or something, or pretend to be peddlers or anything, or watch till she's gone out, or hang it all, there must be some way. This fawn saved my sister at his own risk, Mr. Beaver. We can't just leave him to have that done to him."
"It's no good, son of Adam," said Mr. Beaver. "No good your trying of all people. But now that Aslan is on the move—"
"Oh, yes, do tell us about Aslan," said several voices all at once. And for once again that strange feeling that the first sign of spring, like good news, had come all over them. "Who is Aslan?" asked Susan.
"Aslan," said the Beaver. "Why, don't you know? He's the king. He's the lord of the whole wood, but not often here, you understand. Never in my time or my father's. But the word has reached us that he is come back. He is in Narnia at this moment. He'll sell the White Queen, all right. It is he, not you, who will save Mr. Tumnus."
"She won't turn him into stone too, then," said Edmund. "Lord love you, son of Adam, what a thing to say," answered Mrs. Beaver with a great laugh.
"Turn him into stone? If she can stand on her 2 feet and look at him in the face, it'll be the most she can do, and more than I expect of her. No, he'll put her to rights all right. It says so in an old rhyme in these parts.
Wrong will be right when Aslan comes in sight. At the sound of his roar, sorrows will be no more. When he bares his teeth, winter meets its death. And when he shakes his mane, we shall have spring again."
"You'll understand when you see him."
"But shall we see him?" asked Susan.
"Why, daughter of Eve, that's what I brought you here for. I'm to lead you to where you shall meet him," said Mr. Beaver.
Is it a man?" asked Lucy.
"Aslan a man?" said Mr. Beaver. "Certainly not. I tell you, he is the king of the wood, and the son of the great emperor beyond the sea. Don't you know who is the king of beasts? Aslan is a lion, the lion. The great lion.
Oh, said Susan. I thought he was a man. Is he quite safe? I shall feel rather nervous about meeting a lion.
That you will, dearie, but no mistake, said Mrs. Beaver. If there's anyone who could appear before Aslan without their knees knocking, they're either braver than most or just silly. Then he isn't safe, said Lucy. Safe, said Mr. Beaver. Don't you hear what Mrs. Beaver tells you? Who said anything about safe? Of course he isn't safe, but he's good. He's the king, I tell you.
I'm longing to see him, said Peter, even if I do feel frightened when it comes to the point.
That's right, son of Adam,
said Beaver, bringing his paw down on the table with a crash. He made all the cups and saucers rattle.
And so you shall. Word has been sent that you are to meet him tomorrow, if you can, at the stone table.
Where's that? said Lucy.
I'll show you, said Mr. Beaver. It's down the river, a good step from here. I'll take you to it.
But meanwhile, what about poor Mr. Tumnus? said Lucy.
The quickest way you can help him is by going to meet Aslan, said Mr. Beaver. Once he's with us, then we can begin doing things. Not that we don't need you to, for there's another old rhyme, you see.
When Adam's flesh and Adam's bone sits at Cair Paravel in the throne, the evil time will be over and done. So things must be drawing near their end, now he's come and you've come. We've heard of Aslan coming to these parts long ago. Nobody can say when, but there's never been any of the race of Adam and Eve here before. That's what I don't understand, Mr. Beaver, said Peter. I mean, isn't the witch herself human?
She'd like us to believe it, said Mr. Beaver.
And it's on that she bases her claim to be queen.
But she's no daughter of Eve.
She comes of your father's Adam's.
Here Mr. Beaver bowed.
Your father, Adam's first wife. They called her Lilith. And she is one of the jinn. That's where she comes from on one side. And on the other, she comes of the giants. No. There isn't a drop of real human blood in that witch.
That's why she's all bad all through, Mr. Beaver, said Mrs. Beaver.
True enough, Mrs. Beaver, he replied. There may be two views about humans, meaning no offence in present company. But there's no two views about things that look like humans and that aren't. I've known good dwarfs, said Mrs. Beaver. So, now I know that you speak of it, she said to her husband. But precious few. And there were the ones least like men, but in general, take my advice. When you mint things that aren't going to be human and isn't yet, or used to be human and isn't now, or ought to be human and isn't, you keep your eyes on it. You can feel for your hatchet. And that's why the witch is always on the lookout for any humans in Narnia. She's been watching for you this many a year. And if she knew that there were 4 of you, she'd be more dangerous still.
What's that to do with? Asked Peter.
Because of another prophecy, said Mr. Beaver. Down at Cair Paravel, that's the castle on the sea, close down at the mouth of the river, which ought to be the capital of the whole country if it was all as it should be. Down at Cair Paravel there are 4 thrones, and it's a saying in Narnia, time out of mind, that when 2 sons of Adam and 2 daughters of Eve sit on the 4 thrones, then it will be the end, not only of the White Witch's reign, but of her life. And that is why we had to be so cautious as we came along. For if she knew about the 4 of you, your lives wouldn't be worth a shake of my whiskers.
All the children had been attending so hard that Mr. Beaver was telling them that they hadn't noticed nothing for a long time. Then, during the moment of the silence that followed the last remark, Lucy suddenly said,
I say, where's Edmund?
There was a dreadful pause, and then everyone began asking,
Who saw him last? How long has he been missing? Is he outside?
And they all rushed to the door and looked out. The snow was falling quickly and steadily. The green ice of the pool had vanished under a thick white blanket, and from where the little house stood in the centre of the dam, they could hardly see the bank. Out they went, plunging well over into their ankles into the soft new snow. They went round the house in every single direction. Edmund! Edmund!
Edmund!
And they called till they were all hoarse. But the silently falling snow seemed to muffle their voices. There was not even an echo in answer.
How perfectly dreadful, said Susan, as they came back in despair. Oh, I wish how we'd never come here.
What on earth are we to do, Mr. Beaver? Said Peter.
Do,
said Mr. Beaver, who was already putting on his snow boots.
Do? We must be off at once. We haven't a moment to spare. We'd better divide into 4 parties, and all go in different direction. Whoever finds him, you must come back here at once and...
Search parties, son of Adam,
said Mrs. Beaver.
What for? Why, to look for Edmund, of course.
There's no point looking for him,
said Mr. Beaver.
What do you mean?
said Susan.
He can't be far away yet. We've got to find him. What do you mean when you say there's no use looking for him?
The reason there's no use looking for him, said Mr. Beaver, is that we already know where he's gone.
Everyone stared in amazement.
Don't you understand?
said Mr. Beaver.
He's gone to her, to the White Witch. He's betrayed us all.
Oh, surely, really, said Susan. He can't have done that.
Can't he?
said Mr. Beaver, looking very hard at the 3 children, and everything they wanted to say died on their lips, for each felt suddenly quite certain inside that was exactly what Edmund had done. But will he know the way? said Peter.
He's been in this country before. Has he ever been here alone?
Yes,
said Lucy in a whisper.
I'm afraid he has.
And did he tell you what he'd done or who'd he'd met?
No, he didn't,
said Lucy.
Then mark my words,
said Mr. Beaver.
He's already met the White Witch and joined her side and been told where she lives. I didn't like to mention it before, he being your brother and all. But the moment I set eyes on that brother of yours, I said to myself, treacherous. He had the look of one who had been with the witch and eaten her food. You can always tell them if you've lived long enough in Narnia. Something about the eyes.
All the same, said Peter in a rather choking sort of voice, we'll still have to go and look. He is our brother after all, even he is rather a little beast. He's only a kid.
Go to the witch's house, said Mrs. Beaver. Don't you see the only chance of saving either him or yourselves is to keep away from her? How do you mean? said Lucy. Why, all she wants to get from you for, she's thinking all the time of those 4 thrones in Cair Paravel. Once you were all 4 inside her house, her job would be done. And there'd be 4 new statues in her collection before you'd even have time to speak. But she'll keep him alive, as long as the only one she's got, because she'll want to use him as a decoy, as bait to catch the rest of you. Oh, can no one help us? Wailed Lucy.
Only Aslan,
said Mr. Beaver.
We must go on. We must meet him. That's our only chance now.
It seems to me,
my dears," said Mrs. Beaver, "that it is very important to know just when he slipped away. How much he can tell her depends on how much he heard. For instance, had we all started talking about Aslan before he left? If not, then we may do very well, for she won't know that Aslan has returned to Narnia, or that we are meeting him, and will be quite off her guard as far as that is concerned."
I don't remember his being here when we were talking about Aslan, began Peter, but Lucy interrupted him.
"Oh, yes, he was," she said miserably. "Don't you remember? It was he who asked whether the witch could turn Aslan to stone too."
"So he did, by Jove," said Peter. "Just the sort of thing he would say too."
"Worse and worse," said Mr. Beaver. "And the next thing is, was he still here when I told you that the place of the meeting was the stone table?"
And of course, no one knew the answer to this.
"Because if he was," continued Mr. Beaver, "then she'll simply sledge down in that direction and get between us and the stone table and catch us on our way down. In fact, we shall be cut off from Aslan."
"But that isn't what she'll do first," said Mrs. Beaver. "Not if I know her. The moment that Edmund tells her that we're all here, she'll set out to catch us this very night. And if he's been gone about an hour and a half, she'll be here in about 20 minutes.
"You're right, Mrs. Beaver," said her husband.
"Right, we must all get away from here. Right now. There's not a moment to lose."